Hello friends, Father Marcus here again. Today I want to speak about the account of the flood of Noah as it is found in the Old Testament of the Bible in Genesis chapters 6 through 9, as well as the Mesopotamian flood myths. Now before we begin, I don't want to dwell on whether or not the story of Noah and the flood is factually true, but rather I want to focus on the relations between the two stories. We have to remember that the Bible is not meant to be a scientific textbook, but rather it's meant more so to teach us the truth about something, about who God is. So we have to focus more so on the lesson and truth that God is trying to teach us, although we are certainly free to accept the account as a historical event. God really is trying to have us focus on the truth that He's trying to convey to us. In the story of the flood of Noah, which we all know very well, it's meant to show us just how much humanity has fallen into sinfulness. So much so that God decides to complete the work of destruction that humanity itself has started. But God sees hope in a good man named Noah, and He decides that humanity is going to survive through Noah and his family. The story shows not only God's justice, but also His mercy towards us. What is interesting is that there are numerous flood stories that are scattered throughout the Mediterranean world and even further out. And it's not only the Hebrew account that exists, the account that's found in Genesis. There are, for example, the Babylonian and Phoenician accounts as well, and they all have different stories and different interpretations of the flood story. But what I want to focus on today is we will take a look at the Babylonian account. An account that is found in the story of what's known as today the Epic of Gilgamesh. A story that was believed to have first been recorded 3,000 years before Jesus. But most scholars believe the story is actually much older than that. Maybe by another couple thousand of years. So maybe even 5,000 years before Christ. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written in the form of a poem. The main figure is Gilgamesh, who many scholars believe was actually a real person, as there was actually a king of the Sumerians by the same name. The story speaks of Gilgamesh going on many dangerous adventures with his friend Enkidu, and when Enkidu is eventually killed, Gilgamesh begins to fear death, and he begins to search for immortal life that will never end. And so in his search, he finds a man named Utnapishtim, a figure that is very similar to Noah. A lot of similar characteristics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Utnapishtim becomes immortal after he builds a ship in order to survive the great flood that destroys mankind. And Utnapishtim brings all of his relatives, as well as 2 of each species of animals, on board the ship. In order to find land, as soon as the floodwaters begin to die down, Utnapishtim releases birds, and afterwards, after the flood, the ship lands on a mountain. Actually, a mountain that's only around 300 miles away from the original mountain that Noah himself lands on as well, as described in the book of Genesis. What's most interesting is that although there are major differences in the Genesis story and the story of Utnapishtim, the cause of the flood in both stories is man's sins. Both Noah and Utnapishtim are considered to be righteous men in both stories, in both accounts. But what is most interesting is when we compare the stories, that there must have been some sort of a common source from which the Bible and the Epic of Gilgamesh was interpreting. A story that happened long before they were even written. Of course, as Catholics, we believe that the one to be true is the account that is told in the Hebrew Bible, whereas the other flood accounts are kind of, embellished and made up with a lot of mythology in order to fit their religion and culture. And so remember, my friends, we have to take the story with what God is giving us, because God is trying to tell us the truth through the story so that we can better understand our faith, so that we can better understand the person of Jesus Christ, and that we can grow more towards Him. God bless you all, and see you next time.